Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Housing Resource Center Leaders in Housing Counseling webinar. We want to thank you all for registering and joining us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping rules. If you have any questions for our presenter today, you can put it in the question box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. We thank you again, and I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Dorr-Palin, who is the Executive Director of the National Housing Resource Center. Okay, Bruce, all yours.
Thanks so much, Ebony. And Ebony Cartwright is our administrative manager and taking over things. And Ellie's not joining us today because she's out camping someplace where you can only get through with a canoe and there's no internet connection. She's taking a well-earned week off, and we're going to do our best to manage without her on this call, and I have complete confidence in Ebony that we will do this smoothly. So let's see. So we want to do today is walk through a couple things. We pulled this together pretty quickly because there's an opportunity that we wanted to make sure that you were aware of. So we're going to do I'm going to do a little bit of updates on what's happening, especially the work we're doing in Congress, and update people on what they're doing. Thanks for everybody's participation. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And we'll also want to plug that we're going to have a pretty exciting call next week on disabilities. I want to make sure that people are aware of that and signing up for it. But the main part of our call is really going to be from they're doing a project with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, and it's all about heir property and tangled title issues and what's happening if properties aren't properly probated, the impact that has on especially communities of color, especially in the Black community. We did a deep dive into successor and interest a couple months ago, and I think if that's still on our website, and it's really if you haven't listened to it, it's well worth it because it really gives you the tools to really be able to do this work effectively and address some of the issues that are critical here. But it's been an issue that's been part of our work for a long time, and we thought this would be a great opportunity. And what they're doing is really pulling together some funding opportunities as well and put together practitioners, so there might be some opportunities for everybody to work together on trying to solve these issues. So we thought that'd be really worth it. Marcia Griffin from Home for USA alerted us to the opportunity and helped connect us with Art Fleming and Catherine Sherpa, who are the people who are will be with us today. So that should be useful, and I'm glad you all joined us to talk about this. But let's talk. Let's move quickly into what we're working on right now. So the big thing, of course, is the reconciliation bill, $3.5 trillion budget bill. We have been working a lot on first generation down payment assistance. Thanks for everybody's participation in this. This housing counseling has really contributed a lot into the dialogue, and your experience has been really helpful. The big problem here is that we need to get the bill passed, and as I'm sure you've read in the paper, there's a bipartisan $1 trillion budget bill, infrastructure bill that is very traditional infrastructure, and there's a separate bill, the $3.5 trillion budget bill, which has much more. It's much more. It's the less traditional pieces, but really essential to making improving people's lives. There's a healthy $300 billion set aside for housing. Some of it's very important in the rental field, especially in expanding home ownership vouchers. This will really impact a major part of poverty in America, and we think it's terribly important. But we've really focused on the home ownership side of this, which initially the administration had not been so geared towards, and a number of us kind of have been raising this flag, and I would say Maxine Waters and Senator Sherrod Brown have been really helpful in these, and have really been moving a number of things forward, one of which is the first generation down payment assistance, and that's where where there'd be substantial investment in down payment assistance, currently at $10 billion in the bill. And it would be along with existing other down payment assistance programs, but would be very much targeted in a way that hasn't been targeted in the past. So it would be for first-time home buyers, of course, as it traditionally is, but it would also be for people whose parents aren't currently homeowners. And what we're getting at is people coming from low wealth communities, people who are less likely to get the familial wealth that'll help them move forward. The Urban Institute, working with the National Fair Housing Alliance and Center for Responsible Lending, did some excellent work, which we circulated, which is basically to say that there's a population of 5 million people who are likely to be mortgage eligible, who could benefit from this program, whose parents aren't currently homeowners, and would be, more than a third of those people will be Black, and another third will be Hispanic. And this can really help a particular slice of the market that has really, where there's huge gaps between Black and brown and white home ownership. The big problem here is that you have to get all 50 votes in. There's been this back and forth between moderates and progressives, and the moderates are saying that it's too much money. The progressives are saying it's really not enough and we have big problems to solve. And what we wanted to do is to put out a sign-on letter on very short notice, which went out Tuesday. And the idea is simply to say that we need to really have a big investment in down payment assistance, and that this will be a game changer. And there are other important things to increase the housing supply for affordable properties, for affordable home ownership. And but all those things are important for a long-term solution for addressing some of the wealth gaps in this country and home ownership challenges. And it's a broad statement of support for home ownership. And we don't need to really say that to the progressives, but for the moderates, we're wanting to make sure that home ownership doesn't on the chopping block and gets strong funding. So that's why there was a quick scramble. As it turns out, in these things, we have, it looks like we might have some quite significant industry support. We're working on a little bit of wording changes. So the original deadline was this morning, and we're going to reopen the letter, and we may get some broad support from also civil rights groups with what I would consider small wording changes. So we're going to keep it open until Monday and close it then. We'll circulate it to everybody who's signed on, and we'll circulate it to the list so that you're aware of what the new wording is. But this is all part of the politics of trying to get these things in. There isn't as strong a support in the White House as we had hoped, but there does seem to be support there. Maxine Waters, of course, is a really strong supporter. We've been very pleased with Senator Brown. There's a number of other voices. There are some competing proposals, and there's worry that those might take away from some of the proposals we've got. So all that politics we're trying not to address in the letter. We're really trying to make it a big open statement around home ownership. So that's why these things happen. They all have to do with the politics that are going on at any particular moment. I do really want to bring your attention, if you haven't signed up already, and maybe Ebony, you could put into the box into the chat box about the registration link for the Disabilities and Housing Counseling Workshop next week. We've got Dara Baldwin, who is really one of the leading figures in disability rights. She's quite amazing. And you will learn a lot. I mean, this will be a jaw-dropping conversation. There's a lot around the history of disabilities that I think I had no idea about. I've been interested in this field for a while. I felt like I've learned a lot. And we'll have her on, and then we'll have people from Moving On. And Moving On is one of the few housing counseling groups that really specializes in working for people with disabilities to help them with their housing issues. And partly we kind of learn what their model is and how they approach this. This probably won't be the only time we do stuff on disabilities, but this is something I've actually been working on for a while to get us to this point. I feel like we are not paying attention to a very important part of our work. Many of you know I used to be a community organizer and would go door to door and in a variety of communities in the United States, and was really struck by how large a presence there are, and maybe it's not the homeowner, maybe it's their children, maybe it's their relatives they're taking care of, but it could certainly be the homeowner. But how important all this is. When Hurricane Katrina hit, we found people being displaced and needing to have housing that would be appropriately adapted for them, and losing their house was really difficult. And then in the predatory lending fights, I mean, this came up repeatedly about families that were really challenged because if they lose the house, they would have lost their ability to get around, to have access to the resources that they normally had, social services, or they had houses that were adapted, and it made it doubly worse to see them having been taken advantage of by a predatory loan. So all of that's to say that we hope this will be useful, and we hope that you all will both get something out of it, but also maybe contribute more to helping us figure out a little bit more about what the training model should be, how we can make this work better and be useful. So, and then the last thing is that I know many of you participate in our conversations about the difficulties that first-time home buyers having in today's market, not just because of price, but because of they're in uncompetitive situations where real estate agents tell them that offers that require an inspection or come with down payment assistance or an FHA mortgage aren't going to be looked at favorably by buyers. And of course, those are the critical tools to get people in houses. And then competition with cash buyers, and especially these private equity investors. We've got a brief that's basically written and a bit of wordsmithing going on, and that'll probably come out next week, so keep an eye out for that. We think it's really the start of a conversation. We hope to circulate this widely with people in the administration and the White House and in the House and Senate, as well as a number of stakeholders. And really try to move forward a deeper, broader conversation on all that. So as usual, a lot is going on. Thanks for all your contributions. You all have been a big force in helping us figure a lot of these things out. So with that note, let's turn to the main topic at hand. And that is we're going to talk about heir property and how to both prevent people from having problems and also how to resolve them. And we have Art Fleming, who's with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta. Art, welcome, and glad you're here.
Bruce, thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity to share with you what we think is an extraordinarily exciting opportunity for the members of the National Housing Resource Center. And before I begin, I want to take just a second or so to just offer my thanks, my gratitude to both Bruce and Ebony for meeting with us just earlier this week and taking such decisive action and inviting us to participate in your meeting today. So, Ebony, I don't know how much time I have today, but we want to make sure that we leave enough time at the very end for any questions you may have, because I hope that you will have questions. So with that, and Ebony, I believe that you're controlling the flow of the PowerPoint as well.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so why don't we go to the next slide here. So this opportunity, and it is in fact an opportunity for each of you that are on the line, all 43 of you that have signed on today. We want to talk a little about how this whole tangled title issue is sometimes an unknown but somewhat pervasive issue. And given our conversations over the last year or so around this topic, we're constantly sort of the constant response, or the consistent response from those that we share information with, is that they know of the issue, but they didn't know the scale of the issue. They didn't know how pervasive this issue is in the marketplace. So we'll share with you some data that will give you an indication of why this is a huge issue that creates, significant impediments to some of the challenges that you are, as a member of the National Housing Resource Center, that you're working on every day. We'll talk about the impact of this issue as well, but we won't spend, very much time on the challenges. We'll spend more time around the opportunity. That's why that slide is entitled "The Opportunity." In other words, the solution. And we'll talk about the who, what, and where, and how. And you're part of the solution. And we'll share with you how you can be part of the solution. So next slide, please. Next slide. All right. So everyone sort of is, we've been inundated with the buzz phrases that have become in vogue over the last year and a half or so since the George Floyd case around racial equity and generational wealth. But we think that this Heir's property issue is a concrete illustration of those issues. So Heir's property, it is in fact disproportionately found in low wealth and racial and minority ethnic communities. But it knows no biases when it comes to whether or not the issue is, centralized in urban markets or rural markets. It's in both markets. So next slide, please. So let's now just define this issue. Really, there are two instances where Heir's property is created. One is where an owner dies without a will, and what happens is that there is a break in the chain of title. No, please go. Okay, thank you. Where the owner dies without a will, and that there is a break in the chain of title, and you have an occupant in that property, and the occupant carries on as if they are the title owner, but in fact they're not. And when it comes time for that occupant to, although the occupant may pay property taxes, may maintain the property, the title owner may in fact continue to pay on some sort of, previous mortgage. But when it comes time to transfer or sell or improve that property through some sort of, outside financing, they find that they're unable to do so because they're not the title owner, because there's been a break in the chain of title. The other scenario is where the property owner, the original title owner, leaves the property to multiple beneficiaries. And those multiple beneficiaries are unable to come together to essentially, dispose of the property, transfer the property, or realize that sort of organizational or generational wealth opportunity that otherwise they would be able to. Next slide. So what we know is that throughout our communities, many of the blighted properties that you see in your communities, maybe for the most part, are abandoned heirs properties. And the reason that they're abandoned is that, it costs an awful lot of money in legal fees to restore that chain of title. And sometimes the occupant just walks away because they lack, the income, or they lack the available resources to restore the chain of title. It takes, hundreds of hours of staff time by a lawyer sometimes, given what could be a pretty complicated restoration of the chain of title. And it may run into several $1,000s. So there's a personal impact there, but also there's a societal and community impact, that second bullet. It makes it difficult for cities to enforce code ordinances because they, obviously, if you're merely an occupant and not a title owner, you can ignore those notices on code enforcement. But it also hinders our efforts to increase affordable housing and revitalizing neighborhoods. So, next slide. So I've talked a little about, exactly the what, right? So let's talk a little about the scale of the issue. This was a study conducted by the Emergency Land Fund. It was way back in 1980, but let me tell you, the conditions haven't improved at all. It's an estimate that about 40% of all Black-owned land in the Southern Black Belt, that area from the Appalachian area of Virginia down south to North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the Black Belt, 40%, over 3.8 million acres of Black-owned land is in some way entangled in this heirs property issue. Think about all the untapped equity that's present there. Think about all of the opportunities for infill housing, all the opportunities for revitalization, all the opportunities for generational wealth that are stopped in its tracks because of the tangled title issue. Heck, just in Georgia alone, and Georgia is no different than many other states, been an estimate that $34 billion of tax appraised property is entangled in this sort of heirs property challenge. Next slide. Here's somewhat of a heat map that sort of shows where it exists, at least in the Southeast. You're a national organization. We're focused in this area because the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta's district extends from DC down to Florida across to Alabama, but it is a national issue. So it's not just the Black Belt in the South. It's not just the South, but it is a huge issue in Philadelphia. It's a huge issue in some of the Northeast markets and out West as well. So we've defined the issue, we've talked about the scale of the issue. Okay, so what do we intend to do about it? Next slide. Well, let's talk a little bit more, I guess, about some of at the property level, some of the significant barriers that are present when you have a tangled title issue. I've already mentioned many of them. You can't sell the property because you lack clear title. You can't open a line of credit or apply for a mortgage because, as you know, and many of you on this line are homeowners, you know that before you can obtain a mortgage, before your mortgage can be closed, you have to get a title search, and the title search has to be clean. There cannot be a break in the chain of title, right? So you can't use the property as collateral to send your kids to college. You can't lease the property. And then obviously, if you lack title, you can't pass it on to other family members, and that's where that generational wealth issue comes in. Next slide. So now we'll get to the solutions. So who are the parties that are most interested in maybe turning, this tide of what we consider to be, an unknown but pervasive issue that impacts, brown and black people, but also impacts low-income white citizens as well? Well, there's obviously, local governments are concerned with that issue, and they don't want to see abandoned properties that are more than likely heirs' property in their communities. Obviously, the nonprofit organizations that are doing work, whether you're a counseling nonprofit or you're a nonprofit involved in infill single-family development or small-scale multifamily development, if you're in that business, you've encountered this issue. And what you generally do is just say, okay, I'll just move on to the next lot because this lot is not sellable because the owner didn't have clear title. The private sector. I work for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta. The Federal Home Loan Bank is essentially a co-op owned by financial institutions, and our job is to provide liquidity to those institutions. But the banking sector is most interested in it as well. Well, why would they be interested? Because it stops them from extending credit to what could otherwise be a pretty good transaction for them. So it not only impacts, obviously what we consider to be some community objectives, it impacts the ability of businesses to actually engage in the business in which they are created to engage in. And the legal community has a role and interest in this as well. Next slide. So here's what we are proposing. We're coming together, and we believe that given the scale of the issue, how large this issue is across our country, that it requires multiple solutions in a number of different areas, but it requires the work of nonprofit and other organizations, the sort of entities that were mentioned previously on the other slide, the previous slide, coming together and offering solutions in a number of different areas, right? In other words, there's not one single silver bullet response or solution to this issue. We think that involves a combination of those 5 areas. One is in education and awareness. Essentially, what we need is property literacy in that area, because what's occurring out there, similar to what you've seen over the last couple of decades or so around financial literacy. What we've seen is that the issue continues to occur. It's a reoccurring issue. This is not an issue that's just a vestige of the Jim Crow South. It's recurring every day because there's a lack of understanding and education around the whole issue of wills and dying intestate and property law. Just as there is a lack of understanding of some of the credit and finance issues that exist out there. And if you lack knowledge in those areas, then you'll find yourself in a more challenging position in terms of achieving the American dream, so to speak. So education and awareness is extraordinarily important so as to stop this from happening again in the future. Pro bono legal services. So there are entities established at both local, municipal, and state levels, organizations, generally entities that are affiliated with sort of a legal aid organizations that offer free services, and they provide the sort of legal assistance to solve those sort of tangled property or tangled title issues. The challenge is that they're not well funded. They can only handle a fraction of the challenge. They're engaged in hand-to-hand combat out there in the community, getting things done. So pro bono legal services is an area that we've identified as part of the solution as well. Local government innovation. There are local governments out there that are, because they see this as a huge impediment to the growth and prosperity of communities, you know, that they are part of. There are, the city of Valdosta, for example, participated in a forum that we conducted about 18 months ago, and they were doing some really very unique things with their block grant funds and with their home funds to assist residents in clearing up title and putting those properties back into a higher and better use. So local government innovation, academic research. Yeah, we need more people thinking about creating a better regulatory, legislative, statutory environment for this to not occur in the future. So we want folks from some of the think tanks involved in creating solutions. And then you have, you know, these developer contractor driven housing initiatives. As I said before, any of you that are in the infill housing business, I can pretty much guarantee that if you're working in low-income communities, that you have encountered this issue. It's just that you've encountered it and you've moved on to the lot right next door. But, you know, if you're in the infill housing business, you know that, you know, skipping over those problem lots really only creates problems down in the future, because frankly, you know, no one wants to live next to, although you may have a shiny new infill unit, no one wants to live next to a dilapidated, abandoned unit that doesn't, you know, appear to have any prospects for being rehabilitated. So what we are doing is bringing together funders, philanthropic organizations, banks. Some of the law firms can be regarded as funders, because we're looking to gather not only those that can provide a capital response, but also an intellectual and management response. So we're looking to bring together several dozen of these funders, small scale funders, large funders, and every funder in between, to look at initiatives that are being brought forth by nonprofits in one of those 5 buckets that I just described to you: education and awareness, pro bono legal services, local government innovation, academic research, developer contractor driven affordable housing initiative. And we're conducting this forum on December 2nd in Atlanta, Georgia, but the areas that will be covered are 22 states and the District of Columbia, and I think we may have a map or some listing of those 22 states. So the Federal Bank of Atlanta is sponsoring this. We're working with the other sponsors that you see there, FHLB of Dallas, of Boston, then in Pittsburgh, and the Federal Reserve of Atlanta and the Federal Reserve of Richmond. We're the sponsors. What we're doing is bringing together funders. The funders are philanthropic entities, banks, law firms. And the folks who are bringing forth the initiatives are folks like you, folks that are members of the National Housing Resource Center. So next slide. So what we've set up for you is a link, and we have a flyer. And hopefully what we'll do is either during the course of this conversation or immediately thereafter, each of you that are participating will receive a flyer that has a link, a web link. The web link, if you're interested in being a submitter of an idea, and this funders forum is essentially kind of a, and I've used the term Shark Tank, but not in any negative sort of way. It's essentially you're making a pitch to a group of funders on an idea to expand your efforts to solve that problem in any one of those 5 buckets. And your pitch could be a $5,000 pitch, or it can be a $5 million pitch, right? Now, the funders are under no obligation to fund any of the ideas, but what it does is start a substantial dialogue. But you may walk out with funding. So what we're bringing together, what we're recruiting right now, are entities that will submit initiatives. We will gather these initiatives in a briefing book. The funders will receive the briefing book 2 weeks before the event, and we'll conduct the event both in person and virtually. Right? Does this all make sense? It's kind of difficult in this environment. I'm just talking. I don't see anyone. There's no nonverbals going on, and because we're waiting till the end, it's difficult for me to get a sense of whether or not this is resonating with anyone. But the proposals will be assembled into a briefing book and shared with the funders prior to the December 2nd event. Next slide. So we've already talked about the funders and all the different funding levels, 22 states. Next slide, please. All right, so we should provide you kind of a list of those 22 states. That's in the flyer that we have. But more than likely, if you're anywhere, well, look, I'm not going to go through all the 22 states here verbally. I thought we had a map or something there. But all of that information is in the flyer that we will share with you. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions, and hopefully through the questions we'll be able to shed additional light into what we're looking to accomplish.
Thank you so much. At this time, I don't see any questions. Hold on one second. Oh, it says, how can local nonprofits attend this meeting?
Well, you can attend the meeting by submitting the preliminary proposal on your idea, right? So it's not a conference that you're traditionally attending, where you have folks sitting in the audience and listening. That's not what this is. There are only two groups that will be invited to this forum: the funders and the entities that will submit a preliminary proposal, the initiatives, right? And the initiatives are within one of the 5 buckets that we shared with you previously. And your idea can be a small, relatively small idea, a relatively large idea, and everything in between. So hopefully that's responsive to the question.
So
Thank you so much.
I'll jump in here, and it's from Carney Mahone, who's from Atlanta. So I think she might be also asking, can she attend in person?
Is she submitting an initiative?
Let's assume she is.
Okay, if she's submitting an initiative, we may allow some of the initiatives folks to attend in person, but what we'd like to do is have all the in-person attendance on the funders side. We'll have the initiatives participate by virtually. And the reason we wish to do that is because you just don't have a large enough space anywhere here right now to have, everyone, participate in person. The other thing is that we didn't want to provide any special advantage to folks who were in Atlanta or in the Georgia area, where they can attend in person and smooth with the funders directly. But if you're in Massachusetts and you have some travel challenges, then you're at a disadvantage. So we didn't want to do that. So we're thinking through how we'll actually, deliver that. But for the time being, we'll have all the funders in person and have the initiatives deliver their pitch in virtually.
Okay, I have another question for you. It says, is there a page limit for the proposal?
Okay, so that link that we should be sharing with you, it's a pre-developed sort of set of questions. You just check the box, you include some narratives. You don't have to create something, you know, original in terms of a proposal. We have the proposal format already ready for you. And it shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes if you kind of know what you're doing, right? So this is not complicated. We're not asking for appraisals. We're not asking for market studies. We're not asking for what you traditionally have to submit, you know, that takes you 3 weeks to pull together, right? This briefing book will be shared with the funders and it gives them an idea of where things, you know, stand in terms of your thought processes and what you hope to accomplish. We were just on a call yesterday with a pretty notable foundation that will more than likely participate as a funder. And they love the idea of just having that initial briefing. And we'll organize it by state, we'll organize it by category. And if they want more information, then they'll reach out to you, or within the scope of the pitch that you deliver, they'll maybe ask additional questions. And so this is, you know, the opportunity for you to submit the preliminary proposal, get your feet in the door, and funding hopefully will ensue.
So Art, while we have you here, let me just drill in a little bit more about kind of what the opportunity is or what you're looking for. And I mean, I think you did a good job about citing these things. And I think from the housing counselor perspective, some number of clients come to people. And for example, if you're doing work in disaster recovery and your community, and there are community benefits and there's insurance, but we sometimes find that the people who are making the request are actually not on the deed. They're not on the insurance policy. And why is that? Well, typically it's because it was their mother's house or their aunt's house, or I remember in the middle of the foreclosure crisis, we had a whole case where it turned out that what happened was that the property was transferred as a deed of sale, a quitclaim deed, and it was never properly filed. So just getting it filed cleans that up. But it's those kind of mechanical things that we're talking about. And we see it a lot in, well, certainly in properties you talk about that are thought of as quote unquote abandoned. And we also see it in where people are living, I mean, I know when Hurricane Katrina hit, we were often dealing with properties where somebody was 2 or 3 generations away and had been, and their nephews and nieces and grandnieces were living in the property, and some of the key players had died. You know, you kind of have to sort that all out. So there's 2 levels to this. One of which is the part that speaks to dealing with immediate problems that people have, where they can then access insurance or particular benefits, or refinance the loan, or get a loan modification. All those kinds of things are often tied to title and ownership. But it's also, I think, one of the things that I think you've been very good about is also talking about preventive stuff. What can we build into our educational model to get people to start thinking about this now beforehand? And so some of that is, what are the properties that they might have a portion of, and making sure that's properly probated. Some of it may be, what have they done, if they're homeowners, to make sure that they have a way of transferring title, a will, or those kind of estate documents that help protect the interest. And this is a really big issue in preserving wealth in especially Black and Brown communities, and trying to make sure that we don't lose these things. We paid a lot of attention to this issue in the first generation down payment assistance program. So I think just to say that people can think about this in terms of both the proactive educational work, which this is every group on this phone, on this call are deeply involved with, and then also in the client restoration side. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent summary, Bruce. And as a matter of fact, then that would be the sort of approach that you would take with your preliminary proposal. Look, we're not asking you to do something that you ordinarily don't do. That's why we created those 5 sort of areas of interest. And as you know, the philanthropic and funder community, they all have their biases, right? They have geographic biases, they have mission biases, they have program biases, they have funding biases. They all do things differently. So the fact that we're trying to bring together so many different funders gives you a greater shot in which to receive the funding. And as you know, finding the right person to respond positively to an idea that you may have is a difficult thing. You know, unfortunately, that's one of the challenges of being a nonprofit. You spend a lot of your time trying to find the right person that will listen to your idea, and then that right person has to have the capacity to pull the trigger, right? Well, what we're trying to do is bring these folks that have the capacity to pull the trigger, that are the right people, that are predispositioned to do something in this area, in front of you. It's your job now to come up with an idea. But you don't have to come up with the best idea in the world. You have to just basically expand on what you're doing. What Bruce just mentioned, if most of the organizations of the National Housing Resource Center are counseling entities, I would think it would be a natural for you to say, we need to expand our curriculum to property literacy. And here's how we intend to do it, but it's going to take money. In other words, we're going to create an entirely new component, you know, of our financial literacy, our homebuyer education program that involves property literacy. We're going to hire a specialist that can then get involved not only on the education side, but on the resolution side. And, you know, the budget for that will be, you know, $200,000 over the next 2 years or something. Well, okay, that's what you would put into your proposal and submit. That's it. So, you know, I know the wheels are turning out there. I can feel them, I think. But we don't have to overly complicate this. What we're looking to do is to mobilize, enhance, and enable you to do the jobs that you're set up to do, but also solve this issue, but provide you the financial support to do so. That's it. I'll stop there. Any other questions?
Yes, we do have more questions. The next one is, will all of the submittals be made available to the public at some point?
No.
Okay.
No.
Next.
I mean, there's no value in making the submittals available to the public, unless you believe that the public is in some way a funder. No. Now you can do whatever you wish with your proposal, but making it available to the public would only take an idea that someone took the time to develop and share it with others, and essentially that's a work product. And we will keep all of the information confidential, because the work products that you develop, and you know, you may have someone, Ebony may sit down for 2 days, think this through, and come up with the best idea in the world. And she will parlay that into a couple of $1 million worth of grants from various sources. I don't know if Ebony would then say, okay, well, just share this with everyone. Right? Ebony would say, no, I'm the person that invested the time and the effort into this to come up with this really profound, you know, way in which to get things done. You know, eventually the word will get out because people will call me and I'll share with them as I please. but I don't, the idea here is that we wish to try to create some innovation, and sometimes for at least a period or so, you want to keep that sort of thing close to the vest and confidential. So the funders will see all of the ideas, but that's it.
Okay. Our next question, it says, just to be sure, for example, we are a nonprofit organization who currently provides housing information and down payment assistance programs available, information we would then present a proposal on how to attain more funding to reach a larger group. Is this my understanding of the event? I'm not sure what the question is asking.
Yeah, your proposal has to be related to the resolution of Heir's property. Now, if you're in the down payment assistance business, I would say that I would write a proposal. I love this stuff because I can sit there and write a lot of different proposals. I would write a proposal if I'm in the down payment assistance business, where I would want a grant from a large foundation, let's say $1 million grant, that would enable me to, on a demonstration basis, provide an extra $5,000 grant for whenever one of my customers encounters a scenario where they wish to buy a home, but the home can't be sold because there's a title issue. It happens every single day. So, and you can track it, and you have metrics around it, and I would ask for that. And that $5,000 would be used to pay partially maybe a pro bono legal service entity, and because you're bringing $5,000 to the table, that pro bono legal service entity may move you to the front of the line, and you get your deals done quicker because you're bringing money to assist them. I'll write that sort of proposal. Right?
The next question I have for you is, will this include purchasing Heir properties at tax lien sales?
Will this include? I mean, you're saying is you're saying that your idea that you would pitch is that you would want money to buy the properties that have been essentially because of delinquent tax liens. You would want to have the money to go buy those and compete against the private sector. Yeah, you can offer it up and see what happens. I think that is one that folks would look at in a really very curious way, because what you're doing is it seems unseemly, but I understand where you're going with it, because right now it's happening anyway. But what's happening is that those properties are being primarily purchased by private investors as opposed to nonprofits. So yeah, sure, write it up and see what happens.
Okay, next question. If selected, how does the funding work? Is there a start date? Can it be spread over multiple years in order to really do a deep dive into the project?
So we're not the funding, we're not managing, okay. We're not telling the funders, here's how you need to fund. You tell funders how they need to fund, you're not going to have any funders show up at your event. Each funder will have its own parameters. Within your proposal, you can make suggestions in terms of what you need and how it should be funded. But because we're inviting, and let's just say for the sake of discussion, XYZ philanthropic organization and ZYX, right? XYZ may say, I like program-related investments in increments of 50,000 that I deliver to you over the next 4 years. ZYX may say, I like lump sum 1-year commitments, come back to me in a year, tell me how things go. So each funder, that's the dynamic part of this event that makes it so exciting, in my opinion, because you want to pitch and shop, right? And so each funder will have its own set of rules. Don't look at it like, okay, this is not a program of the Federal Home Loan Bank. It's not a program of any of the sponsors. It's not a program of the sponsors, of the funders. It is a dynamic sort of idea generation, funding opportunity. It is just like Shark Tank in that regard, right? Every single deal that you've seen on that television show, if you've ever seen it, kind of is different in terms of like the investment, right? And each of the folks who are sitting there saying whether or not they'll participate, they have a different perspective on how they wish for their money to be invested. Think of it in that way. Right?
All right. Our last question is really a comment. It says, I wanted to share that this is an excellent idea because that market has not been tapped into. This is a great area.
Well, thank you. And hopefully I'll see a proposal from you, right? Look, we need the proposals. Let me tell you what will undo this. Okay? This is such a, it would be easy for us to just have a national conference on Heir's property. And we'll get 400 people there. Big deal, right? Because all you'll do is talk, and we'll then go home in the afternoon. People will think it's wonderful, pat ourselves on the back, but not a single thing has been done. This idea is really one, it's a high-risk scenario. You have to get enough people to submit proposals. You have to get enough funders. You have to get enough folks to submit proposals in all the geographic areas in the 22 states, and you have to get enough funders that represent all the 22 states. If you don't submit National Housing Resource Center constituents, if you don't submit, and you're kind of in the counseling area, down payment assistance area, we're going to have a huge gap in ideas on that education and awareness side that Bruce was speaking of earlier. And my guess is the funders will come back and say, well, apparently there's no interest in this area.
All right, that is it for our questions. We don't have any more. I'm going to turn this back over to Bruce so that he can close us out.
Well, thank you so much, Art. Terrific presentation, and I'm sure you'll get some proposals out of this. We will also circulate this on our list, and I think other people will jump on as well. But appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you, Ebony, and it's been a real pleasure. And again, I want to just say here, National Housing Resource Center constituents, you're in really very kind, capable hands. Bruce and Ebony, they met with us earlier this week. They asked all the right questions, and they made a really very quick decision to bring us aboard. So we appreciate that because they're entrepreneurs at heart, we can tell, and that's what's needed in this area. So thank you very much, and appreciate all the time that you were able to give us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fleming.
All right. Thanks again. Okay, so quick reminder, always we're encouraging you to join NHRC if you haven't already. Actually, we're having a very good year this year, bringing in both new members at some large organizations and smaller organizations. I'm really pleased with that, and we're having a good solid year in renewals this year. So thanks everybody for that. It represents a significant slice of our budget. And I mean, we talk about the benefits that the program has, but I mean, the real reason for doing this is to support the work, and especially the work we can do in Congress and with the administration, things that we lobby that aren't traditionally fundable any other way. So we're appreciative of your joining, and so please feel free to please join if you haven't, and renew if your time comes around. Ebony is actually working on the improving our membership responsiveness and our ability to do this more effectively. So if you have any questions about timing and stuff like that, just check in with her, just shoot her an email, and she'll help sort it all out. Hopefully it's all working smoothly now. We had a couple bumps in the road earlier this year, but we're ironing them all out. So that's all good. And then I just want to, let's move to the next slide. I wanted to just really reemphasize, or if you weren't on the beginning of the call.
Goodness gracious.
Don't worry about it. We have a real opportunity next week around disabilities and housing counseling. We have one of the leading voices in disability rights, Dara Baldwin, joining us. It's a real education to spend time with her. We'll probably have her talk for an hour. You will learn a lot. You will be surprised by some of the history we have in this country around disability access, and you will, I think, hopefully be useful. And then I'm pleased that we have one housing counseling agency that really does work in this field, especially moving on in Wisconsin, and they will give us an idea of how they approach these issues and kind of what their counseling model is like. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more of these in the future as we learn more. It's a really important issue because disabilities are pretty pervasive in American households and our client base, and we need to make sure we're both recognizing that and incorporating it into our models, and hopefully all of us can benefit from this. So with that quick note, I think we're going to close out the call. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll send out the materials later this week when we've got the recording online. All right, thanks, everybody.